Carson, we're good to go.
No, with 200,000 air squeeze.
All right. We'll call to order the October 20th, 2021 APCHA regular board meeting. Go ahead, Cindy, please take the roll.
Okay. Rachel,
Here.
Francie,
I'm here.
Carson,
Here.
David,
Here.
and we know that Allison will be joining us later, and John should be joining us a little bit later as well.
Do we have a quorum then to start?
Yes, we have city, county, and 2 of ours, so we're fine.
Yep.
Good, good.
Okay, with that, we'll go to public comment. I know we've got Dan Pearl. Dan, go ahead. We've got, we try and abide by a 3-minute time limit. Good to see you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Carson. I just wanted to make a brief comment about the ownership exclusion zone, and my understanding is that this board is considering expanding that into the Grand Valley, and hopefully I'm not wrong about that, but I don't think it's a great idea, and I wanted to share my reasons why. In general, I support, obviously, the ownership exclusion zone. It's really important piece of the code, right? And if you have a bed in this valley, if you're taking up 2 beds in this valley, that's a problem, right? And there's only limited capacity for housing in this valley, and so everyone, at least in our system, should only have access to 1. But I think when we expand it down to areas like Grand Junction, the idea or the justification seems to be, well, if you can afford a home in Grand Junction, then you shouldn't be qualifying for APCHA housing. And I don't think that's, it sounds good in practice, but I don't really think that serves the mission of APCHA. And, you know, I know that one important, one thing that I know that this board is hoping for is that retirees have an ability to downsize or to move on if they're no longer in need of the unit that they once occupied with their family. So this is a great mechanism to, if we're not going to allow APCHA owners to kind of invest in a retirement property in the Grand Valley, then it kind of cutting off our nose to spite our face. And so I think that that's one reason why we should consider, or why we shouldn't expand the ownership exclusion zone into that area. And just this notion that if you can afford a home in Grand Junction, you shouldn't be an APCHA, I think is slightly misguided as well. I mean, we don't say like if you can afford a boat or if you can afford a fancy car, then you can't own an APCHA home. We just have income and asset caps that account for that. And so I kind of find it somewhat arbitrary that we're choosing this one asset to say that if you have this asset, though, it disqualifies you from APCHA housing. Again, if you had an asset that was a home in our valley that could be occupied by someone who's commuting to work up in Aspen or Pitkin County, then yes, I do agree it should disqualify you. But just the notion that any additional home should disqualify you from APCHA housing, I don't think is wise. And I think we should incentivize people to think about perhaps a place they might want to retire so that they can return some of these larger units to the housing stock. So I'm hopeful that the ownership exclusion zone kind of stays in its current boundaries. I think it's important, but as an APCHA owner, I'd love to be able to consider a retirement property outside of the valley, one that doesn't impact housing or for our local workforce. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Any other public comment? If so, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Carson.
Elizabeth, please come up. And if you would just identify yourself for the record.
Is this on?
Is the red light on?
Yes, it is. Okay, I'm going to go quickly, just in the name of expediency. I'm back, and I'm going to continue to come. I've got a fall where I can join you, and I'm here as a private citizen, although I do have the column in the Aspen Times. I think a lot about housing, and I have for the past 13 years of writing that column, and I have a ton of ideas. And I'm happy to share them with any one of you at any time. And I just want to thank those of you who reached out after the last meeting and contacted me, and we got together and were able to begin some dialogue. I really appreciate it because my intent is to be part of the solution. I meant it when I said that I commend you all for the direction that this is taking. I sense a real sea change, and it's this new leadership, and I thank you for that. I commend you for continuing to move the needle forward on right-sizing our inventory. This pending change from 24 to 19 in the dependent age is a solid baby step forward, but it stands to make a really long-lasting difference. There's still a lot of right-sizing to do, but this is a good start. The ongoing discussion regarding sellers' standards is critical. Since I only get to speak at the beginning of a meeting, I have a couple things to add to what was discussed 2 weeks ago. The who pays question. The seller, the person who lives in the unit, pays. There is no rational reason why anyone else should be considered responsible. Not the city, not the county, not the housing fund. Even with our dire housing situation, no one is forced to buy a pigsty. The decision to purchase is an individual one. We need to stop the hemorrhaging, and we need to stop it now. When the seller pays via the sales proceeds, there is no need to put the city or the county in the position to nix this concept that you all are working to develop. It will be self-funding by the sellers. Secondly, Rachel and Skippy brought up last week, and Skippy reiterated to the papers, we can't continue to expect someone who bought a house for 80% subsidy to pay for 100% of repairs. Really, that's outrageous. It's like saying kids on scholarship don't have to pay damages to their dorm rooms, but the others do. We're dealing with adults here. If we cannot hold everybody to the same standard, and that's the standard to care for something that this community has generously provided, then we ought not to sell to the folks at lower categories. It's not real life to be granted a pass to trash your unit simply because you cannot afford to take care of it. That's simply not good enough, and it's a slap in the face to this community. If you can't take care of your unit, then you shouldn't be put in a position to buy one in the first place. Another consideration for another day, but if Cat 1 and Cat 2 can't afford the HOA dues and maintaining their units, then they should all become rentals when they turn over. And frankly, anyone at this table who condones trashing an APCHA unit for any reason does not belong at this table. Not that you asked, but I have some thoughts on some pending issues before you. And with all due respect to Mr. Pearl, absolutely expand the OEZ. It is absolutely outrageous that people living in this community for pennies on the dollar while owning appreciating property effectively down the road can continue to do this. Given the nature of our housing crisis, property owned anywhere in the state should be disqualifying. As for guaranteed appreciation, this began back when APCHA housing was not a long-term proposition but a step up to the free market. There should never be guaranteed appreciation. It doesn't exist in the real world, and the numbers after several decades, you've seen them, they're preposterous. These big numbers effectively price units far out of existing categories, and that was never the intent of the program. The examples that were put forth on page 99 of your packet staggered me. An initial purchase price of $500,000, simple appreciation 2.5% a year, owned for 20 years. Nets an appreciation of $250K. That means that today's maximum sale price is $750K. That's ludicrous. A flat 0.5% in the same scenario would net $50K. If we have to do appreciation, let's get that more down in the range. Did you realize that the intent of appreciation in this program was to support the owner in addressing maintenance costs, not generating a profit, nor providing a nest egg? Now that people are living their entire lives in subsidized housing, we need to adjust downward the guaranteed appreciation, if any, to preserve our various categories and not provide financial windfalls where there shouldn't be any. This is publicly subsidized housing, not the free market, nor is it Vegas. HOA reserves. I feel that one bailout of one HOA will break the back of the entire program. There will never be an incentive for another HOA to fund their reserves again. As for expiring deed restrictions, you have 469 units comprised of 787 bedrooms that are set to expire on the Michael Kinsley deal. I won't even contemplate the asinine decision-making that yielded this predicament, but it's a huge percentage of our inventory, and I would suggest prioritizing the fix. The community did not build these units for APCHA to sell and for those buyers to end up millionaires. It's wrong on too many levels to count. But trickiest of all is the tidal wave of retirees in our housing. It's big now, but the tsunami is coming. Temptation would be to kick the can to the next board, but it's already really late, and you all seem like you're somewhat willing to take on some difficult challenges. I'm really sorry to disappoint McIreland, but no one is calling to evict retirees. We do have to recognize that a housing program filled with retirees is not good for the community either. These last three issues are the biggies, and there's no time like the present to add them to the list and begin talking about them, because ignoring them is not going to make them go away. I hope you will add these to your priority lists and keep these constructive conversations going. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments? Seeing none, we'll move along to Executive Director's comments and staff update.
Thank you. Thanks to Maddie for pulling up my slides. I'll start with last night. Thanks to the Board of County Commissioners. Cindy and Matthew came in person, and I was online, only to find that most of the BOCC was online. So it was kind of funny. And anyway, we had a great conversation with them. Reviewed the 620 budget, which is the APCHA budget, to which the county funds half. And then we had a robust discussion on a couple different topics and reviewed the work plan as well. So with that, the big news of the week is Matthew. And Maddie, if you hit Control L, that will give you full screen on that. Oh.
I don't know what new is.
Well, it was APCHA's new, but it got a bar through it, so that's okay. I figured you all had seen that slide so much that instead of APCHA Executive Director, I should say APCHA's new Executive Director. So welcome to Matthew. Matthew, what are you, 10 days in now or something? Oh no, it's just a week.
Yeah. Yeah, I arrived in the Valley last Monday, so I've been here a little over a week. And started work last Wednesday. Very wonderful reception from the APCHA staff and Diane. So I'm very excited to be here. And I'll be even more excited in January when my family joins me from DC. But right now I'm living like a reformed bachelor in a rental place in Ironbridge. So it's great. I'm very excited to be here. I look forward to working with everybody. Thanks.
Very good.
Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome.
We've got a list of about at least 50 items that keeps growing for topics to train Matthew on, and he's jumped in both feet. He will be reaching out to you in the coming weeks just to schedule some time. So any questions for Matthew? Including, like, Roaring Fork Valley trivia. So thanks. Next up, so affidavit, they are still coming in. Bethany, you're here. Do you want to give a quick update on where we're at and what's happening and the letters?
Sure. So we're at 93%, as the slide says. Folks are still calling and saying they just found it in their stack of mail from a month ago, which is great. Starting, I think, next week, Maddie and I are going to start sending out kind of a general form letter to all the owners that have not responded that basically says, now's your last chance. If not, your next communication from us will be a notice of violation, which includes a fine of about $150. For not turning in the affidavit. We are very much hoping to get that number below 100, just because that notice of violation is specialized for each of those owners. So it will definitely be a big workload for staff to complete, but at the same time, it's needed because they're required to be done. So.
And it's an amazing number considering there's been a lot of effort on the part of staff, but there hasn't been a lot of expenditure to make that happen. So, and that includes the door-to-door piece, which we told you about before. I'll hand it over to Cindy and let her do a quick update on available sale units.
Well, I'm glad Maddie has this up because I'm wasn't 100% sure of what was left. I know for rentals right now, we don't have anything that we're advertising for this week, or I don't think next week either. But please sign up for our notifications on our website. It's very easy to do. We do have a couple of units, Benedict Commons, a Lone Pine, a Category 4 Lone Pine, and we are actually we're selling the 53 Forge Road, the home at Burlingame. We have, I believe, 3 in-complex bids, so people who actually live in the townhomes in Burlingame Phase 1 has that right to purchase, and we've had a lot of interest on this, so we're really pleased. So we're moving forward on that. We still hope that we can get that closed sometime before the end of the year. The others, you're going to have to please look on the website as to see when they end. I believe Benedict Commons, that ended.
Commons ends next week, and then the Lone Pine ended today.
Okay, I thought, okay, great. So again, sign up for, we can just tell you, please sign up for notifications on our website. That keeps you updated on any sale or rentals that we have.
Thank you, Cindy.
So signups, and also you can go either to the APCHA website or the home track, and they're inextricably linked to see these pieces for sale and rent. Cool. I think that's it for me. Next one should be a blank, I'm guessing. Yep, that's
Okay.
it. Thank you.
All right. So that gets us to the consent calendar, so I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of October 6th. Any corrections or additions?
I would make a motion to approve the consent calendar of October 6th.
Okay, motion from Rachel,
I'll second.
second from Francie. Cindy?
Roll call. David,
Here?
Carson,
Yes.
Francie,
Yes.
and Rachel.
Yes.
Thank you. And Allison.
Yeah, what about me?
Yes, Allison.
Hey. So sorry that I had to run, and of course the dog was quiet as I walked up, but I approved that consent calendar.
Great. Thank you.
Turn that up. Okay, very good. So moving to updated deed restriction. So Cindy, do you have are you going to present on this one?
Yes. We started talking about this a couple of months ago with regards to updating it to see if we can get maybe more interested parties to go under a brand new deed restriction. One of the suggestions was to change the appreciation from 3% or the consumer price index, whichever is less, to flat 2.5%. Right now, the consumer price index has been going really crazy, and it's been going up quite a bit, and it still hasn't stopped going up. So what we used to see the last couple of years was it was really up, down, up, down. So one month you'd look at your sales price, and it would be a lower amount than the month before. So we felt that going the direction of a flat 2.5% would be good. Right now, because it's going a little crazy, I don't know if that many people would be interested in it. But I still think that there's some very necessary changes that we need to add to the deed restriction. And some of the ones that are in the deed restriction in your packet are clarifications. We did add on page 5 of the deed restriction, or page 10 of the packet, the intent of the program. So this kind of lays out what the intent of the program is. Maddie, can you put that up, please?
And as Maddie's pulling that up, I did just want to remind folks that the other, even though the CPI is, you know, it's insane right now, it's still important to update this deed restriction, because every time someone sells, unless they're one of those really old ones that doesn't, no, actually, we do update all the deed restrictions when they sell. So for example, a number that had been expiring deed restrictions actually got updated to the new unexpiring deed restrictions when they turn over. And also, as we prepare for Burlingame 3, we want to have this updated deed restriction. So even though it may not be attractive to new people, current owners, it may be attractive to some who look and say, boy, I'd love to reset my capital repair $10,000 or something like that. But ultimately, we do need this as a tool, even if the CPI stays high. Thank you.
And that's also a good reason to maybe change the CPI or to change the appreciation to a flat 2.5% as well. Because it would be on anything going forward. And then if somebody in a new, or in an, who has an older deed restriction elected to change, and wanted to do some type of a transfer, because when we transfer, if anybody requests a transfer, they have to go under a new deed restriction as well. So that's one of the things that might be a positive as well, if you feel that the changing the appreciation to a flat 2.5% works. So the intent of on page 10 of the packet, there is the intent of the program that we've added. The other changes on that page are just clarification. On page 12 of the packet and 7 of the deed restriction, we added the part about refinancing. So anytime anybody refinances, they have to let us know that they're refinancing. This way, it allows us to look at what their sales price is and make sure that they're not getting a loan for anything greater than what they can sell the unit for. Yes.
Just on this section, shouldn't there be something about the consequences if you do it? It says you shall not, but it doesn't say that it is certain violation or fine, or it doesn't list the consequences.
For refinancing without letting you have to know.
Yeah, first, and I think we would need something in there along those lines of what does it mean if you do violate this provision?
Is there something in the fine schedule that if they're in violation of the deed restriction?
Yeah, I mean, it may be, but it should still reference it here to failure to comply is a violation, blah, blah, or something.
I mean, shouldn't we know if somebody's refinancing? Unless they're doing it within a year, they're gonna have to get a new appraisal. Don't we?
Most of the time, we find that out. And this happened quite a few years ago, that the person got a loan outside the valley, and even though there was a recorded deed restriction on it, the title company didn't do a very good job, and he got a loan for greater than what he could sell it for. Then he went into foreclosure.
Right. Yeah. I'm just thinking about it. It's against the law to make a loan with real estate as collateral and not have an appraisal. So, would that constitute notification?
Well, some people could get a personal loan and then still put that up as collateral. I mean, there's these out-of-state mail order flybys.
So are you assuming that the appraiser would contact APCHA?
There's no other way for them to get a value.
Yeah,
A lot of times they do, because they ask us what the value of the property is.
Okay.
They ask for a letter of value.
Cindy, I have a question about the 2.5%, and I think you've been through this before, but I might have been asleep at the wheel on a Zoom call or something. So if you currently have a appreciation limit of like 4%, and then you have to redo your deed restriction, do you go to 2.5?
You, at that point in time, if it clicks in a brand new, that you have to go under a new deed restriction, it would.
So eventually, everybody's gonna be at 2.5. That's the
Now,
goal.
there are some properties like the North 40 that they don't go through us, there's a lot it's their deed restriction is on specific set of guidelines. So it's not an as they are amended from time to time. So there's still property out there that unless it's actually sells through us, if any property sells through us, we automatically put an updated deed restriction on it. But there's a lot of the resident occupied units out there that do not have to sell through us. So at that point in time, we can't require the new owner to go under a new deed restriction. If an owner at the North 40 sells, they can sell to a qualified household, but we can't make them go under a new deed restriction. That deed restriction is based on a certain set of guidelines.
And so they would keep the existing deed
Yes.
restriction?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
And I think there was something in there with regards in the fines, fine section.
Yeah, hold on, let me get back to it. So the fine doesn't specifically call out refinancing, but it says encumbering property with debt in any form which exceeds at any time the maximum resale price of the unit is a $5,000 fine.
Whoa.
So if they do request that loan outside of the valley, or if it slips through, that's for a
Right.
higher amount. There is a fine to us, but
You know, it just seems that maybe we should also think about adding something smaller to the fine schedule that correlates to this item, so that, you know, should you do this outside of, without getting APCHA approval first, it's $200. You know, I'd hate to see someone do a legitimate repair and have done it wrong, you know, paperwork wrong, and then have a $5,000 fine, as opposed to,
Over borrowing.
yeah, you know, it just,
Yeah.
the whole process of not contacting you first is what we're trying to nail down here.
Right.
And I think there should be a small fine for that.
we can,
Think
next
about that.
time we do the first reading, we can add that in.
To the fine
To the fine
schedule.
schedule.
I mean, or everyone else discuss it.
Yeah,
I just-
let's go ahead and,
Keep
so
going.
we got 30 minutes here to try and work through these 5. So let's let Cindy go ahead and finish, and then we can go to questions and then to discussion. One by one, we can pick these out and look at which ones we need to discuss.
Great. So again, the next change is on page 14 of the packet, which does change it from a 3% or CPI to that 2.5%. And we are clarifying it with, as based on the purchase price. It's simple, not compounded. We get questions like that all the time. This clarifies that to anybody, that it's always done on a simple basis, based on that purchase price. It's not compounded on a yearly basis. So that's clarification on that. On page 15, F, we are adding so that owners are required to maintain their units in compliance with the minimum standards. We already have something like that throughout, but that's something that we are also adding again for further clarification. Let's see. On page 17, towards the bottom of 17, 12 of the deed restriction, 17 of the packet. In determining a person's place of residence, APCHA shall consider, we wanted to really put out some specific criteria that people can look at, so that they know that we're not arbitrarily making a decision. This is how you can prove to us that you are actually living there, that it is your place of residence. And because that's important to us, especially if we get a complaint that they're not living in their unit. So this helps us by adding, especially if they have children in school, are they in school here? Do you have your vehicles registered here in Pitkin County? Things like that. This helps us with that clarification. On if somebody says, well, how do I do that? We have a list right here. Again, the next address shown on voter registration, there's a bunch of other things that are also listed on page 18. The other changes are just, on that page, are clarification. I'm trying to think of where another major change, the next major change has to do with minimum or permitted capital improvements, which is on page 24 of the packet, 19 of the deed restriction. And we added some information with regards to permitted capital improvements. At one point in time, we did not allow carpet. That is one of the things that we're seeing that is kind of a big thing, that we will allow replacement of carpet that can be done every 7 years, because then maybe the owner will change their carpet more often. It does depreciate down, and it'll have that 7-year life of depreciating down. So if they do it 1 year and then 3 years later they sell, part of that will have depreciated down. But then that next person who comes in should still get a carpet that still has a decent life left of 4 years. Or they're not paying as much because it's depreciated down, if that makes sense. We also included counters, cabinets, vanities, that they can be replaced every 15 years. Again, standard material basically. If somebody wants to put in a marble counter, they can do that. But should they get credit for doing something that high end? So it's something that we want to give them credit for, but maybe not that amount of credit for that upgrade. Because it is still deed restricted housing. We are still trying to maintain the affordability for the next owner, even though we still want them in really good shape. We still want to try to still maintain affordability for that next owner.
So, if I could, does that mean you're going to create kind of a standard price range for that replacement bathroom vanity? That, you know, a good durable quality range would be $500, and we can credit you for that. But if you did a gold-plated one and it cost you $1,500, you're still only going to get $500 credit.
Right.
But you'll have a standardized list that you use.
That's what we're trying to work on.
Thank
yes.
you.
Yeah.
That's a big job.
Yeah. And then permitted capital improvements outside the 10% cap has to do with energy efficiency items, improvements for the benefit of seniors. That's like if you need to do a walk-in tub, if you need to do a ramp, things like that. Any improvements for health and safety protection devices, replacement of a hot water heater, furnace, boiler, and electrical upgrades. Usually, you're going to get something that's more energy efficient. I mean, and that's what we're looking for. Is we want people to really start to think, this is more energy efficient than this. So this is what I'm going to get, and so they can get credit for that outside of their 10% cap.
I would put energy efficient in that language then, if that's what you're shooting for somewhere.
It's in A.
It is.
It's
Oh,
A.
okay.
Yep.
So it's
Right.
all of these items are under that. Okay.
And again, improvements of structural necessities such as leaks, drainage issues, foundation, roof. We haven't allowed roofs before because it's usually a repair. But that's a huge thing that we're looking at. But usually, like in HOAs, it's your HOA is paying for that roof. And this is something that is not part of this, but it's something that that should be, I think, considered down the line. That should there be a certain percentage of HOA common expenses or common, if they has to do with repairs of something pretty major, should an owner be able to recoup some of those? Right now, if an HOA does something, the owner cannot. Should the owner be able to recoup a certain percentage of that? Again, everything depreciates down, but should they, if the homeowners association repaved the parking lot because it needed to be done, and it cost $10,000, should the owners get part of that depreciated down up to a certain percentage? That is not in here, but it's something to think about whether that should be added or not.
Could you explain that again, Cindy? So let's say, like at Hoagland, whatever that place is, now they have to get a whole new septic
Right.
there, and so one of the people just moved in like a year ago, and so suddenly they have to pay $10,000 for this new septic, but it's an HOA decision that they're gonna do this, so how does that work for those people? I mean,
Well, if it's something, if it's the direction that the board wants to go, you could say you can, like 10% capital improvements for that specific unit. On top of that, you can get an additional 10% from common of what your percentage is. So if your percentage is $10,000, you can add that to your as a capital improvement, but again, that would depreciate down. So, but something like that, and so you do a certain portion, but you also don't make it open-ended. You put a cap on that as well, of what somebody can also get additional credit for.
And let me add to that, the rationale here, and the board has discussed this a little bit before. If a home needed a septic system, that would be an eligible item that they could apply it here. And so saying, let's make the equivalent, because more of our housing stock is shared housing.
Right.
Can we create some equivalent?
Okay.
I mean, this, to me, seems like a pretty, I mean, I almost wonder if this should be part of the HOA capital reserves discussion. I mean, I just feel like going into
This,
this right now, I mean, this is a huge bite, absent that piece of it,
and that's fine.
yeah.
Just think about
I mean,
that. We'll
I
put
mean,
that, but I would
I
agree.
agree with what you're saying, I'm
Yeah.
just saying, I feel like,
We should table it.
Or
Yes.
Carson, to your point, don't tackle it today,
Right.
but it could be something that just because that HOA capital reserve is
Right.
such a large nut and it's gonna be a long discussion, it is something you could front load.
Right.
Let's take that as a single topic, and going into a large discussion about about HOA capital reserves, boy, it might pave the way and make that path a little bit easier. Thank you.
okay, yeah. All right, so,
Can I comment on this one?
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, because this is the one item that really kind of stuck with me as I was looking through this, and that is because I don't think we have it fully defined, but the term outside of the 10% cap, I'm really stuck with what does outside the 10% cap mean? And we haven't defined that very well, and do things outside the 10% cap also depreciate or not? I mean, we just haven't put it in here, and I think we just need to elaborate, because when we're saying this is inside the 10% cap on your original purchase price, and then these are outside the cap, but what does outside the cap really mean? And so I'm not objecting to it at all, I just think it needs to be more clearly defined
Okay.
to people, and does it depreciate, does it not depreciate, does it
Which it would.
depreciate at the same rate?
Right, I completely agree, and I
Yeah.
think all of those are things that we're not gonna know until we get into the HOA capital reserve discussion.
I agree, and I
Yeah.
agree fully with you with pulling item E out, but are you talking about only pulling out that larger E item? Which is foundations and common HOA elements, but leaving all the A, B, C, D, and F in this, because I'm okay with them, but I just want.
Yeah, that would be my preference.
Yeah, my preference is to take E out as well, but still this terminology, outside of the 10% cap has to be defined.
So E could relate to a single-family home, though.
Yeah.
And so a structural issue that might be on that owner is not part of the HOA. And so I think maybe making clear, so not taking E out, striking it, but making it clear
That it's only for single family
yeah,
or modular,
self-standing
mobile.
something,
yeah,
yes.
Okay,
We'll clarify
Good.
that.
And maybe use the word above instead of outside.
okay.
Let's see, Tom's got his hand up.
Yeah, let me comment on that. I think outside is intended, it should probably be changed to exempt from, because the idea is that it's not dollars that you add up to come up with to reach the 10% cap. But, so it should say exempt from, but it's still, as Rachel has mentioned, we still should say something there about how those items are treated for purposes of appreciation and depreciation purposes.
Okay.
And I have one last other
But
comment.
exempt is what I think, exempt is the word I think it was closest to what the intent was there.
As we move into taking E to condominiumized or townhome units, I think we really need to think about creating a form for the HOAs to use, to fill in, to give to APCHA for how this dollar number will be allocated. I mean, they're not doing that accounting now. And so just thinking about a building in Hunter Creek, you have 3 bedrooms, you have 2 bedrooms, you have studios, they put a new boiler in the building. They have to start doing some allocation to the units in some way that then Cindy and these guys can track. And so I think we would need to create that sort of form and ask them. It really should be an advantage to the HOAs to go with this, because you're literally telling them good news. Your owners are now able to reclaim some of the dollars they're spending on capital improvements. They should be less resistant to special assessments or raising the dues if they can recover some of that. But this is how you have to help them to recover those dollars through these forms. Something along those lines.
Good
Okay.
idea.
So those are the basic ones. We can, if you're fine with this, if you want us to keep the 2.5% in this so that we can go forward with it, we can bring it back for final review with the suggestions made. And hopefully put this into
Well-
effect before the end of the year, if you're okay with it.
I mean, I think we have, I mean, I've got some questions on some of these.
Okay.
And Allison's got her hand up as well.
Yeah, oh, and Allison, go ahead.
Thanks. Is it time to go kind of one by one? I don't have
Yeah,
to be
let's,
first.
you know, let's take these one by one, and, so we've got 18 minutes left on the agenda, so,
We have till 5 o'clock.
yeah, and so, as Einstein said, make it, everything should be made as simple as possible, but not any simpler, so keep that in mind, for comments. Okay, so, section 1, intent of the program. Is this one we're okay with? Anybody object to item 1? Allison? All right, so then we'll move to number 2, add a refinancing section located on page 2. You know, I'm okay with that one. The only thing I do have, I think to Rachel's point about the fine, I wouldn't want that necessarily to be, because what we're trying to stop in doing this is we're trying to stop people from borrowing more than the value of the house. We've already got a $5,000 fine in place for people who do that. So we've already got a pretty punitive fine in place for people who do that. What I wouldn't want to have happen is somebody who just simply wasn't aware of that we changed the rule, they refinance their house, and we say, oh, hey, by the way, here's $200
Yeah.
or whatever, right? So I'm okay with requiring them to tell us. I mean, we're gonna, like I said, know if they get an appraisal, but I'm not so sure I'm on board with the.
Adding it to the fine schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you know, obviously if someone takes out a home equity loan and it's below the resale value, they've not overburdened the home, it's kind of no harm, no foul. But on the other hand, they may have been adding to the price for things that would not normally even qualify under any of our,
Right.
our guidelines and stuff. It could be gold plating. And so that could be a little, I mean, that would be just something they'd never be able to recoup.
Right.
Even though they got the loan. You know, it's okay with me, but at the very least, we could put down something that doing so may trigger a fine in the fine schedule. I mean, at the very least, that, you know, to something that reminds people it's more than an ask here.
Right. I guess I just don't know what it gets us, because, I mean, if somebody doesn't tell us and they're gonna, if somebody is gonna try and take out more than their property is worth, we already have a fine for that. And
Well, this isn't
just-
about whether they have.
it's whether they notify us. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna go to Tom and Allison both have their hands up. Tom, you wanna jump in?
Yeah, so first of all, you know, it should be you know, there are a host of obligations, requirements, and limitations in the deed restriction, and every one of them it is subject to, and if you violate any of them, you're subject to enforcement. So I don't really think it's necessary to say anything different with respect to this one, because if you do say something different with respect to this one, in terms of how laws are construed, there could be an implication that the fines don't apply to other types of violations. You got to be careful about
Okay.
about, you know, making a specific reference to enforcement in this case. The second comment is, you know, every time you get caught speeding, it's a violation of state law. But a cop doesn't have to give you a ticket every time. So yeah, we have to understand that there's a certain amount of enforcement discretion, and that, you know, there are violations that are serious, there are violations that are not so serious, and that, you know, sound judgment will be exercised in determining whether or not somebody's going to get fined, and if so, how much.
I can
So,
accept that.
I'm
That's
just
fine.
throwing that out there.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay.
Because
Allison?
we can't
My turn.
Allison?
Yeah, I had a issue with the term approval. I think maybe parsing this out a little better, because it's not APCHA's decision if you get to refinance or not, right? APCHA just wants to make sure you're not refinancing above and beyond what the home's value is. So right now, the way it's stated, it sounds like if I'm sending a kid to college and need to refinance my house or whatever to make that happen, I have to beg the office to be allowed to go through that process. And so, can APCHA say, no, you're not allowed to go through that process? What APCHA would say is, no, you did it for the wrong amount, or we're not gonna let you, borrow above and beyond. But that, like, the order of operations in regards to that term approval sounds confusing to me.
Okay, Tom, did you have another question?
Yeah, there's an easy answer to that one. We could change this to say, must contact APCHA for determination of compliance with that section that prohibits.
Everybody agree on that?
That's a good,
Or even just must contact APCHA prior to completion, right? Like,
But tie it in, I think if I understand
you
your
do the
concern,
lawyer
is
words.
that
Perfect.
it looks like APCHA's, it looks like APCHA's review is very broad and general, but I'm just saying tie in APCHA's review to that limitation on borrowing too much money.
I appreciate that.
Can we get more volume
No
from
pun
the
intended.
online people?
Maybe the way to do this too would just be to say that, to not catch people who just simply don't know and are trying to do the right thing, is to say that, and if an appraiser contacts APCHA for valuation, that also constitutes notice.
Right.
Because that's
okay,
ultimately what we want.
that's valid, that's good.
Okay. So the next one here is the appreciation cap. So personally, this is one that I would pull. I think, again, this is trying to adjust this right now. I mean, I don't even, if we did do this, I don't know what I'd be making my decision on, because we don't know all the problems and the solutions and everything else. So I think we probably do need to adjust it. But for me, I would feel like I was making an arbitrary decision if I picked a number today. 2.5, 3, 1.5, like it just.
Didn't we have a pretty long discussion about this, about a month ago?
We have,
About that number and,
yeah.
And there were questions as to why we picked 2.5.
yeah.
I mean, because the way that I look at this is, I mean, so the, like we're talking about, so the purpose of having a cap at 3% or CPI is to say that the reason that the CPI is there is that, your purchasing power, as prices go up, it stays the same, and that 3% is the cap to say if things get out of hand, we don't want the value of the properties to go up too high. And so, for me, if we're adjusting it downward, I mean, you're already in a position today where, what's the CPI today, Cindy?
It's,
5?
I couldn't tell you. We get a new CPI every month, and it's more of what it does on a yearly basis versus what it does on a monthly basis.
Yeah, but we've all known that Social Security is
Yeah.
going up 5.2% this year because of CPI
It
or
is?
something like that. Yes, it is.
Yahoo!
And so that's the cost of inflation for anyone doing repairs, and
Right.
we're asking them to only receive 2.5% along that line. That starts to be challenging. If I may, I think this Exhibit C on page 25 is really interesting to all of us. That last conversation we did have over the past couple of weeks, talking about, and, to my mind, there's been a little bit of trashing of our owners, let alone the units. But there's years in here when you're lucky to receive 1% appreciation. And the repairs were probably still going on at 3%, and the deterioration of the unit continues to go forward. There were years when people got 0% appreciation. And so when we talk about taking the seller's, standards and then deducting away from them, we're acting as if they got 2.5% every year, and they didn't. They were not. I mean, we're acting as if they had a solid 2.5% for 20 years, and they did not. And the units still deteriorate at a regular rate, wear and tear, on a daily basis. Every year they got 0%. So that's kind of challenged me. And I think Diane and Cindy know, I was the one who really came in and said, hey, we have to have the intent part of that deed restriction in there to let people know your appreciation is intended in many ways to be what you keep up your unit with. It's not about profiting, it really isn't. And I think we also have to step back to take a thought about what the housing program was when it was started and continue to this day, to be a mirror to the free market, to be a secondary market for people to have as many of the benefits as possible of home ownership and permanence in a community and security in their housing and a place to raise their kids as possible. And then we tried to figure out how to keep the prices low and cope, go with work. But all of our units are not the same. Some were not publicly subsidized at all. There was no tax dollars in those whatsoever. And we have, I think, one of the best thought experiments to undertake is our rental units. Our rental units have been managed at exactly 30 to 33% of someone's income every year, professionally managed, not volunteer HOA boards who don't know what they're doing. And yet consistently, we've always had to put more public money in for repairs over time, consistently, And so it's hard to say, well, the rental people were all doing 1/3 of their income, and they couldn't keep the roofs on, and they couldn't keep the boilers on, and everything. But these people who we gave 0% appreciation, or 1% appreciation, or 1.5% appreciation some years, they should have been able to afford to do it. They were bad guys for staying in our community for 30 years, and that's not true. And the one thing we don't have in this deed restriction, which I asked about, was, do we ever say that they cannot take more than your original purchase price? Can you imagine buying a home for $100,000 and being told that we're going to take more than your original purchase price to try to repair it back up? But we don't have a bottom on this. We just say you can be taken down to just 0.5 a year. And in some years, you didn't even receive a 0.5.
So like I said,
I'm just having problems with this in a lot of ways.
So is this one we should just pull out today?
I'm not sure I'm willing to say that, but
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Allison's got her hand up.
Okay.
I had that question, why 2.5 and not 3? Why would we move it down? And so please give me my homework, which meeting to go rewatch. We don't have to go over it in our 6 minutes here, but I feel very similar to Carson and Rachel here with some issues with that number. So Carson, I would support us not including that in this big wrap up right now.
David?
Yeah, I think it should be pulled for further discussion.
I have one question. So these are all moot points until they sell anyway. It's not like they're getting the money. I mean,
that's right.
So, the 0.5% or the 2.5% doesn't mean anything until they sell. And so are they, if we went to 2.5, are they assuming that when they go to sell, they're going to be guaranteed a minimum of 2.5 every year since they owned it?
Nobody's guaranteed anything.
No.
And if you see that in bold right underneath there, nothing herein shall be construed to constitute a representation or guarantee by APCHA or the city that on resale the owner shall obtain the maximum resale price.
Right,
that
I
is
saw
very
that.
specific. No one is. They are not expected to get that.
Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think I'm agreeing with Carson and Rachel is that since it's not guaranteed anyway, and it changes so much, why have it? Why have it in there? I mean, to
Well,
me, if I were buying it or
I think what we're talking about is not removing the appreciation, we're just saying to pull it from.
No, I
Yeah,
know, I
right.
get that.
Keep
I
it
get that.
at, keep it at 3% of
Keep it at
CPI, whichever is
3%
less right now.
For now, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm fine with that.
And just so I'm clear, then we would bring this to a first actually, we don't have to take this to a first
No.
reading because these changes aren't required by the board, but we'll keep it at, the advantage to coming to a decision, as I think you are, is that this means we can actually start using it.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Okay. All right, so then section, or question 4, then, so we got just a few minutes here, so, which is the place of residence. So I had a couple of questions on these, specifically. So would any one of these items, so A through N, would any one of those count towards, as a proof of residency?
No.
Okay.
You
So-
would need, we would take,
Collection.
we would take a
Right.
collection of these.
Totality.
Yes.
Okay.
Based upon what we need. So if one doesn't come back as,
We'll consider any of the, we'll
Okay.
consider these. is
Because
what
I
we'll
just,
consider.
some of these, like, I mean, address on voter registration, I mean, you can move and leave your voter registration
Yeah.
here. Location of your primary physician, I can almost guarantee you my doctor doesn't have my home address. Yeah, I mean, mailing address, but, those were the
But
two
is your
that I had.
physician in Grand Junction? Is your primary physician in Grand Junction?
No.
I mean, it might be that could
Right.
help. if you
Okay,
don't
as
have a
as
couple
long
of
as
these
it's not
others.
one, I'm good
Exactly.
with these.
Right.
Any other comments on these? Tom has his hand up.
I was just going to confirm that. These are considerations, and we're not assuming that someone's going to meet all of them. It's just that trying to get trying to make a determination based upon the totality of the circumstances rather than just on one thing.
Okay, great. Any other comments on that one? All right, so then the last one here is the changes to permitted capital improvements. Starting on page 14, so I think we covered a lot of those.
I think we talked about some wording changes.
Pulling out number on page 19/24, pulling out
E,
number 2, item E.
or modifying
Or
it.
modifying it to only include single-family homes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then with regard to permitted capitals, instead of outside, exempt from the 10% cap, we'll clean up that language as well.
Okay.
Okay,
Carson, on the broader document, just two points. One is that I think it's important to keep to an important schedule, but when there's an important topic and we're asked to approve it or not approve it, I don't mind running over a few minutes if we need to.
Sure.
That's important. But the one thing I had really asked, and this is more, I guess, a Tom question and other attorneys or anything, is are there any other preventative measures that we can put in the deed restriction to prevent some of the problems we've had in the past? And, the things I don't know that are valuable or not, but I've wondered whether any sort of agreement to binding arbitration if there's disputes over the resale value in the future or the value of the capital improvements that people made.
that sounds like a question for Tom.
Right, and so these are just things to think about. It doesn't have to be answered in this next 2 minutes, but the whole concept of are there programs that Cindy, staff, enforcement, Bethany have run into in the past that any additional clause or notification to an owner would be helpful? That's what I want to see. And the other thing was just kind of, I understand that we can get the HOA's budget for these multi-family units when somebody goes to sell or not. But I think having that we can request an HOA statement, that's the best way for us to start to find out what shape the HOAs are in and what sort of liabilities they have. And I could consider something like that in the deed restriction as well.
and we do receive that at the point of sale.
At
They
the point of
provide
sale.
The last
Right.
meetings, the
Minutes
last
of
minutes
budget.
from the meeting, the budget, all those things are provided at point of listing,
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
Assuming that this HOA is together enough to
That
have
has that.
minutes of the meeting that said.
Colorado law requires it.
I don't think we've seen one that
Doesn't-
hasn't
Even
lately.
if they-
Tom and Allison both have their
There you
hands
go.
up.
Can I answer Rachel's question
Sure,
really
go
quickly?
ahead.
Hey,
Hold
Tom,
on
just
just a second,
one
Tom.
second,
Diane-
Answer it.
Sorry, I just wanted to
Sure.
I just want to answer Rachel's question. Most of the time, so staff makes little tweaks to the deed restriction as time goes along. And there are things that don't come to the board. This is a wholesale, big change that we actually felt this needs to come to the board. And they have made improvements and changes specifically on what you're saying. So you're
Okay.
absolutely correct.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And Tom, did you have anything to add?
So Rachel makes a good point about what happens if there's a disagreement between staff and the seller, and it could be more general than this. What if there is a fundamental disagreement about what the maximum resale price is, whether for this reason or something else? And we've never had one of those situations that we haven't resolved through negotiation with the seller, but we don't say here explicitly that there's a procedure to follow if there's no agreement. However, we do have a grievance procedure in the guidelines, or in the regulations, excuse me. And that grievance procedure applies to any disagreement about a staff interpretation of the rules. So without saying anything more here, and we can do that if you want to, put in a specific process for this, that it would go to the hearing officer or something like that. But the grievance procedure would apply today if there is a dispute about the maximum resale.
Thank you.
Allison's got her hand up.
First of all, Carson, I was just thinking how appreciative I am that you are keeping us to schedule and running an efficient meeting. I have one clarification and then maybe something more philosophical. So 10%, we have this 10% that can go to block A, and then you can earn even more if it's in this block 2 permitted capital improvements above the 10%. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Great. And I do think the more incentives we can have to get on the front end, especially those kind of health and safety improvements, are excellent. I'm also really in support of the HOA repairs being involved in that E. That's people sitting around voting if they all are going to tax themselves to make an improvement. And I think the collective is more likely to vote, yes, let's do the roof, let's do the whatever, knowing that they will benefit from it in some way. And I agree with where that came from. If a single family homeowner would get some of that back, why wouldn't one of us living in a condo get that back? And let's keep our stock as great as possible through incentives like that. So I know it's not on the list right now, but I'm in big support of that. And kind of wanted to speak to what Rachel was saying about how maybe we've been trashing on the homeowners a little bit recently, because I think some of the preventive measures come from compliance elsewhere in our regulations. So the cases I know of where it's just such disrepair, these houses are such disrepair that we get into issues of more stuff needed than the price of the home could ever be sold for, or should be bought for, is because someone wasn't living in it, or they did overextend their mortgage. And so we're talking about people who are living in these units and working probably way more than full-time in our community every day, waking up, making their coffee, going to work. I mean, they're real humans who, if there's a health and safety issue, if they have a broken window, they're not going to say, I'm going to leave it for the next person. They live there. That's their home. We are a community and we value these units. So I think some of the stuff that's really bad that we need to get at through our capital improvements discussions is more of a compliance issue as far as who's living in that. And we're taking care of, that's coming along a lot too. So I just want to keep that in mind, just along what Rachel said as well, that really humanize that the owners are not bad people. They're who we want, and they're not trying to live in homes of disrepair intentionally and trying to pass on degraded places. Like, no one wants to just live it out and hope that the next person pays for it. We all want this to be home.
Agreed.
Very nice.
So any other comments on this last capital improvement section? Nope. Okay. Moving along, we've got two discussions. First on dependent age, and the second on the ownership exclusion zone. So we had a pretty robust discussion on this change in dependent age. Bethany, Cindy, Diane?
Yes, I'm leading.
Okay.
So, the first one we'll talk about is,
85.
we are on page 85, Maddie's on it, of the packet. So APCHA staff's recommending the dependent age be amended from 24 to 19 to qualify for a bedroom at point of qualification. So again, this is at point of qualification. Not, we're not going to say that a family that's in the unit, all of a sudden their child turns 19 and they have to be kicked out. This is at point of qualification. So what we did after the discussion last time, Tom assisted. We rewrote the definition in the APCHA regulations. It is below. So one thing that is called out in here is that it used to say that in order for a dependent to qualify that they had to be in residence for 100 days per calendar year, and that was changed to 9 months out of the year unless a custody agreement, divorce decree, or similar document is provided. So we see those often. They'll often dictate how many days that child is with that parent, and we can operate under that agreement. We changed it down under number 2 to 19 at time of application, as I've already stated. We also tightened it up a little bit. I know there were some questions about, there was a bad line in there about an exempt individual. I think it was an exempt foster child. And so we have cleaned up the definition. They have to be claimed as a dependent on tax returns to count, unless, again, as stated above, there's a custody agreement or a divorce decree that states otherwise. And then we added part 3 on page 86. We added, top of it, Maddie, we added that piece on if the dependent child is permanently disabled. And so we've added in a piece on that. And I am happy to answer any questions that you all might have, but we tried to fix this based upon your feedback last time.
Thank you, Bethany. Allison?
One typo, which I usually don't catch, but
please do.
The former reporter?
I know, it's not, it's a good thing I always had editors. A, proposed change is dependent, second line, relative as defined herein, I believe, instead of defined herein.
Yep.
Minor. And then this part four then, who would this apply to? A person's not qualifying child if she or he provides more than 1/2 of his own financial support. So we're already lowering it to 19 or under. So we're saying someone who is under 19 is earning half, like, what does that mean?
So basically they're a full-time employee and or close to it and providing their own financial support. So they're not receiving assistance from whether it's their parent or their caregiver.
So likely this is someone who is out of high school, but not yet over 19.
Correct.
And we don't want them to count.
So yes, and this is a little bit of a holdover, and Tom helped us pull this from a lot of this came from the IRS's regulations on what counts as a dependent, as so many of our regulations come from when it talks about this. But certainly the idea is that if they're providing half their support, they're likely not even on the tax return, to be honest, to be counted as that dependent. So it's kind of that final catch-all.
Agreed, and Tom's got his hand up. Let's.
Okay. Yeah.
we've changed some things. With the change, some of these requirements that are in here kind of go along with the 24 years of age requirement that you're changing. So, for example, we from the last draft, we took out the provision that had to do with being a full-time student, because if you're under 19, who cares if you're a full-time student or not, right? So we found that was only in there because between 19 and 24, which is an adult age, we want to make sure that you're a legitimate student, but that's gone now. Similarly, it may be that we can delete, it's your judgment, but if it's 19 years old, are we really worried about how much income they make?
And it seems like an administrative nightmare to find out if it's half. That's
another point. Yeah.
So if it's such a small sliver that a family would want to be bidding on a house with a 19-year-old, an 18-and-a-half-year-old who is working full time, but it just seems I guess
you're right. It's not, for the trouble that you would have in dealing with it, it's probably a very low percentage possibility. I did want to make one other thing unrelated while I have the floor here, though, is on number 5, we no longer, I talked to staff about this, we no longer need 5C. That can come out. That was a holdover from IRS requirements.
Okay. All right, so Allison is advocating for striking number 4. I'm in agreement with that. I think it's such a small sliver. Other thoughts, Rachel, Francie?
I agree with you, and it's hard to say what's financial support. Are they charging them half of the mortgage, Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree.
All right, so we've got strike
too hard to
4
prove.
and strike 5C.
And one grammatical catch.
And the
by
one grammatical, yep.
There was a syntax problem in, is it on 4? A qualifying relative must be not have more gross income. So I don't know if you care about that, but the syntax is
Oh yeah, we'll fix
weird.
it.
So maybe you need a qualifying relative must, and then put B in A and, and then not have and so on.
Sure.
So that it flows.
You're right. Yeah, that's my mistake there. I apologize. The syntax is terrible. As an old English major, I really am embarrassed.
I hope you're blushing over there, Tom.
All right.
I am.
Okay, so then I think we're good on that. Any other discussion there? Okay, and so then the next
Carson, can I have quick direction?
Sure, of course.
Can we, with these changes, could we bring this back for a first reading?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Happy to move on then.
Okay, and so then the next one here is OEZ.
So this is a proposed change to the ownership exclusion zone. And basically what staff is looking for is I'll walk you through this, but we would like direction on if this is a conversation you would like to continue as a board. The question was asked in the survey that occurred, I think it was in January of this year. Results were presented on that. It was a little bit split as to whether we should expand the ownership exclusion zone or not. Those who don't live in APCHA housing thought that we should expand it more strongly than those that we did, but I think there's several options for expanding going forward. One is to maintain our current ownership exclusion zone. One is to expand it to include different counties on the western slope, this sort of general area. Another option is to expand it to the entire state of Colorado. You could certainly expand it to the entire continental United States. And then you could take another approach and say, we're going to maintain the current ownership exclusion zone, but we're only going to allow one property outside the ownership exclusion zone. That might be a little bit of a hard one for staff to keep track of, but at the same time provides kind of an in-between. We are seeing folks that have homes, you know, I know we have some that have 2 homes in the state of Colorado, but they're outside of the ownership exclusion zone. We have a lot of folks that are reaching retirement age that certainly have retirement homes in Arizona, Hawaii, etc., and spend 6 months a year at that property. Certainly under the retirement provision, they have to rent out their APCHA unit if they are gone for that 6-month period. So at least there's an employee residing in that unit for those 6-month periods. So we are seeing it. We're also seeing folks that own multiple houses across the either country or abroad. And so I want to turn it over to all of you, answer any questions you might have, and really figure out where you want to go, and then staff can take the time and try to draft some potential regulations to bring back to you for a future meeting.
All right, so I'd like to start, I guess, does anybody want to advocate or play devil's advocate for just maintaining current OEZ?
I would discuss that if we need to, but I'd rather not jump into it in that way.
Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is you have another preference.
Well, I just wanted to kind of bring us back to thinking about what our goals are for a minute. And a lot of times I hear the goal of, well, when people have reached a certain point in their lives and age and everything, it'd be nice if they move on and let a new working family move in. So that's been a stated goal. We're not pushing anyone out, but it would be nice if we could right size better or see working utilization. A number of years ago, the rules were changed so that when someone had retired, they could lease their property for 6 months a year and be gone as long as it was rented to a qualified working tenant through APCHA. So we got 6 months of a rental to a working family and 6 months of another community goal, which is a permanent community where our seniors are still involved and still are here. So we had those 2 goals matched. Now, if we say all the continental U.S. you can't own another home, those seniors are going to stay in that home until they die, whether they're retired or, and probably not working. So then we would get 0 worker out of that house until the point in which they passed along. So that's why I wanted to talk about the big picture of what are we trying to get to here.
Right.
Now, I will pass these around. Anyone who's been to Grand Junction, as it was later this month, it's their retirement newspaper about all the wonderful services they have for people who've retired. And it makes you wonder, you know, if anybody who is in our category 2s and 3s and 4s might ever find a place to move to outside of our community, they're going to want to put down payment on it and start establishing that far before they reach the point of retirement. And if we're going to exclude those opportunities from here on out, we'll say, no, we want you to stay in your unit until you die. Don't buy anything 135 miles from here, because we're afraid you might be profiting off of that while you're still working here or whatever. I just have to wonder where we're getting. And the same goes for Leadville and other parts of the state. So just for me, I'm kind of like, you know, law of unintended consequences. We might not get what we want from making that provision. And the last thing I'll say is that whatever we do, it's not going to be retroactive. So people who are already in their units, who are already doing these things, will be able to continue those. It's just people in units now who will not be able to buy a place to ever move to when they retire.
Allison.
That's all.
Well, now I'm bummed again that I'm not there because I missed show and tell. I raised my hand when you said, does anyone want to play devil's advocate and keep us as we are? So I raised my hand to take on that role if need be, because I am wondering if it's a problem. Again, you know, if someone could buy free market in the valley in this exclusionary zone, and maybe I hadn't really thought of the retirement perspective quite yet, but wouldn't they? You know, so we're talking someone who's spending $100,000 to buy on the western slope somewhere, or they could spend 1.5 and live here. I mean, they're not taking advantage of living here when they really could have owned. So that doesn't seem like people are sneaking in because they could buy in Paonia or something like, which might be in the zone. So I kind of want to know more about, is it a problem? I had a question about retroactiveness. And then I'm thinking things like inheriting property, especially if you did all of Colorado. So all of us who were born and raised or in Colorado and someday will lose our parents and inherit those homes. Like, why is it a benefit to Aspen for me to sell that home and be sitting in my same unit with that money in the bank account than to have that money, you know, in my parents' house, kind of if you inherit a property? I'm wondering about that. I guess I'm not quite seeing this as a problem.
Okay. David, do you have anything?
Not yet.
Yeah, I have something in. My concern is that if somebody wants to have a house somewhere else, but they really want to be in Aspen from April through November or whatever, and this is where their family roots are and where they've made all their business connections and all their friends and everything, I think that's getting to what you were saying about it's not just taking care of our seniors, it's sort of protecting our community. So I wouldn't want it to be so restrictive that we weren't accomplishing that.
Right. So, you know, Allison, you asked me how big of a problem is it? I mean, I think as Bethany has said, and I can tell you there are people that own property that free market homeowners would envy that are currently in APCHA housing, and 5-6 properties.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And
Outside of the ownership exclusion.
outside of the
currently.
OEZ, correct.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I mean, I think, you know, in my mind, completely agree, we certainly have to, you know, the people who've been here for 30 years, we also have to look at, you know, we talk about community, we also have to look at the people who are trying to move here,
Oh, absolutely.
right, and can't even get their foot in to be a part of the community in 40 years. So,
Yeah.
you know, I do think we need to balance it, and, you know, personally, my personal opinion would be to say that we keep the current OEZ, but that you can only have one property outside the OEZ. I think that catches Allison's, you know, example of your parents' house. It catches the people who want to do something in Grand Junction. But if you've got millions of dollars that you're looking to invest in real estate and continue living in Aspen
Yeah.
for free,
Yeah.
well, you need to go somewhere else.
Well, no one's living here for free,
Right.
Or
but
buy
I agree
something.
with what you're saying, subsidized manner. Yeah, I
Correct.
totally
For-
agree.
Or buy something in Aspen.
Right,
Yeah, no, I just circled down the issue of multiple assets.
right.
I mean, I think that's where you want to zero in on. And in some levels, again, we're not able to do this retroactively.
Right.
But going forward, someone's assets should be showing up on their qualification unless they're keeping them in secret LLCs and this and that. And that's where we need to make sure we have the right forensic accounting to people who are qualifying. And it tends to be the higher end units where people have a
Right.
lot of multiple stuff. The thing that is plain for all of our housing is that, hey, you could win the lottery, and as long as you continue working your hours, we're not making you move out of the unit. And we're most Americans, you know, on a broad level, their home is their single largest financial investment and their single largest asset. In our community, that's not the case because we're appreciation capped. And so we tell people, hey, invest in stocks, start your own business, do something else with your money. Don't, you know, build your retirement otherwise. And that's okay. So if somebody had started to acquire property after they moved into a unit because they could, I don't know what you say about that. You know, maybe say it has to be out of state, or maybe the last thing I had thought about is this provision where you can rent for 6 months a year. Should there be more requirements on that? That if you can only rent 6 months a year if you only own one other property, or you can only own 6 months a year if something. I mean, that was just a blanket provision before anybody thought about people having 5 homes.
Right.
You know, and so maybe there's something in that side that
Right.
can be fixed.
Allison's got her hand up.
Yeah, I think because we don't, once you buy in, we don't take into consideration how much you earn from then on. This is a hard one for me. I mean, I think what we're trying to do is house our workforce. So to say, well, if you can own houses elsewhere, just go to those other places. Like, we want the person here working, and they can't. You could have 5 other houses, and still none of it adds up to buying a studio in Aspen, right? So for us to say, we want to be in control of where you invest. Like we'd rather you spend that money on stocks. We'd rather you go buy crypto, but we don't want you spending it on a house you saw in the prairie. It seems a little overbearing, or I don't know why we choose property. Like, just go live elsewhere. There's no equivalent. Aspen is so far out that knowing that someone can buy a house doesn't necessarily mean they're taking advantage of that. And we want them here, not just to live, but to work. I mean, we want people here. If everyone who could own a house in Grand Junction moved there, then we wouldn't need the workforce housing program, right? Like, we want people to stay here. And I'll never make enough to ever buy free market here, working here my whole life. So it seems weird that we would dictate what people invest in.
Yeah, I think just to play devil's advocate, I mean, we have people that can't afford any other properties, period.
Yeah.
That need housing today.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with
Right.
that. Where would you expand the zone to if we expanded it?
I mean, I think the state of Colorado makes sense. I mean, I hear the argument for Grand Junction, but, you know, that's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I'm just, again, I just want the unintended consequences to be known, because I'm not gonna move to Nebraska. If I move somewhere else
Right.
and freed my unit up, it's gonna be somewhere in the mountains.
You know-
and then, so I'll just die in my unit.
Well, and to
the last 20 years.
you know, just to sort of poke a hole in my own argument, Bethany just said that some of the people that we have that own property are in Arizona and Hawaii.
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
They may be able to be that way.
So if you qualify initially, you never have to qualify again. So if you qualify and you're a ski bum, and then you go to work for tech or something out of your home, and you're suddenly making $1 or $2 million a year, you get to keep your affordable housing unit.
Even if it's category
Your
1.
1,500 hours need to still be
Yeah.
in
You
Pickens
You
still
still have to
County,
meet
but
all the
you're
other
earning.
requirements in
The
Pickens
online
County.
tech job wouldn't qualify, more likely not.
But if you come across money, like the lottery example, if you win the lottery, you just have more money to your name.
I think therein lies the problem. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, really, would we really be sustaining people who have enough money to buy something else? That just doesn't make any sense.
You know-
I mean, a lot of people would want to go out and buy something in the free market or move to Carbondale or something like that, but that is an inherent problem, I think, for the system. Hate to say it.
I
And
think it-
Francie, just so you know, people who rent in the APCHA system do have to requalify every 2 years, so when their
Right.
income goes up, their rent goes up.
Yeah.
Can go up.
Yeah.
I think David's got a point.
Yeah, so perhaps instead of thinking about an exclusion zone in terms of geography, perhaps we should be thinking about in terms of gross income or gross assets.
Yes.
If you can afford to own other homes, then you shouldn't own an APCHA home.
But
How do you do that
what we're
then?
starting to
But-
talk
well,
about is a
that's a good
process to
question, that's
remove
for sure.
people from their homes every 2 years.
But
I mean, if you're talking about people have to requalify, if you now make more income than when you first qualified, we're gonna make you sell your house?
Not
I-
more, but.
No, but I mean, I'm just saying that's
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 basically
Yeah, no,
that's the issue.
I don't think this is a road, I mean, this is a road we want to go
You don't
down.
have to requalify once you've already bought a place at the income you've had. I mean, that's just been the
I'm
rule
not, yeah, I'm
forever.
not suggesting requalifying, I'm just saying perhaps every 5 years there should be an asset statement or something that shows
If you own property.
if you own, do you own property somewhere outside of,
And
Why
what
does
do
it
we
have to
do
be
with that
property?
information? Does it then become, now you have to leave because you have own other property?
no,
or
I'm
we
not
just
saying that
wanna
you have to
know-
leave it, but you may have to divest yourself of it.
Well, you have to
But
divest yourself
then
of
you
it
have
now.
someone sitting in APCHA property who just has more money in the bank, that's not I don't know that that's our goal. We want the workforce housed, and buying property in our current zone is just such an exponentially higher discussion than buying property in
Right.
other places in Colorado that It's not like you all of a sudden have the money to buy a home. You could have stayed here in the workforce and bought free market. You can buy free market in a tiny town. You know, I just think that we live in such a skewed real estate environment that saying a house as if buying a house in Kansas is the same as buying a house in Aspen, and all of that makes you rich and you shouldn't qualify even though you're working, you know, at a restaurant here day in, day out. That I don't think that adds up.
Well, and to just further poke holes in the argument that I said about the state of Colorado, I mean, you know, by doing just Colorado, you're penalizing sort of the people in the middle, right? Like not the high-end people that can own the $5 million house in Hawaii,
Right.
Yeah.
which there are, right? And so, you know, all that discussion, I feel like we're sort of right back at the beginning. So,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, to me, I mean, this is where I think that if you do the one, I mean, I hear Allison's point about, you know, about assets, you know, stock market and whatnot. But by being in APCHA housing, you're getting into real estate at a lower cost. And so to me, I think that the one property outside the OEZ makes the most sense.
I could see something like that, and
Allow one property outside of the OEZ?
but the main thing is, how is it going forward? And what are we trying to accomplish? And it's about going forward. If it's one property, I could live with that. I think that is somewhat reasonable. But Allison makes a great point about limiting people's investments in other parts of the country. Or, I mean, what if you had to take out a co-mortgage with your parents to help them in their house?
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Or what if your parents die and you inherit $10 million and you came in as a restaurant worker? Do we really want that person living in housing, even though maybe they love their job at the restaurant? And so, I don't know. I'm wondering why we're limiting it to real estate when the possibility of having other things of value should disqualify you from living in a place that somebody else really needs to live in because they don't have a ton of investments. I mean,
But are we talking about at the point of qualification or after the fact? Because if it's after the fact, then we really have to start thinking about what all protocols
Right.
that would mean.
Yeah.
I know, it'd be very complicated,
Agreed.
I get
Total
that.
change to the
but-
regulation.
It'd be a total change of everything, and who bothers to buy, because, you
So
know,
I'm gonna get kicked out if I finally am doing really good.
yeah.
So I think I'm hearing from Allison, just leave it the way it is. I think I'm hearing that from Rachel.
I wish we could find a better way.
Okay.
Yeah.
A better way.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah, I'm multiple assets. I'm worried
Yeah.
about multiple assets in the future.
I mean, it's a great point. I mean, I don't know how you discriminate only against real estate.
Yeah,
And-
I think it needs to be the entirety of.
Right, but
someone's-
then, I mean, then you start going down the road of, as Rachel said, of then you just, I mean, that's a complete rewrite of the,
The whole system.
the whole system.
No, I
So,
think the theory there is that if you have $10 million,
You're gonna move
why
up.
would you live in the condition? We're putting up with a lot to
Yeah.
be in affordable housing, and so
Yeah.
I can see. I'm sure there's that example, but we have to remember that we're not talking about others,
Right.
bad people. We're talking about our coworkers. We're talking about our community here who's living in APCHA housing. If they get so rich that they could, take advantage. Man, wouldn't you
probably
want to
gonna
spend
move
your
up.
life earnings on a mansion in Aspen? Why would you put up with my neighbors? So
Or your dog, for
we
that
have
matter.
A little benefit of the doubt in some of that requalification. Takes care, or you don't meet your 1,500 hours anymore. Like that doesn't change, and that's the point. Is this workforce housing? So I think there's ways to get around that without rewriting the whole system. I just want to, put a little less panic on the fact that someone might get way too rich. I think the way too rich people are not going to want 3% or less appreciation on their assets.
Yeah. At the end of the day, there's the old axiom that bad cases make for bad rules.
That's right.
And if you try to make your rules tailored down to every last case, you're going to hurt the good people too. But if there's any noodling about this to try to think about it, again, I still think it might come back to the 6-month rental rule.
Right.
And what you need to do to qualify for
Right.
that. And maybe if you own 3 homes, you no longer qualify to come back 6 months a year if it's rented. I mean, you know, maybe that's where you have a better pressure point.
Okay. Well, I think we can continue the conversation on this, but I mean, I think for now, I think you make a compelling case of just keeping it where it is and continuing to see if there's other ways for us to try and, as Rachel
And
said.
track the magnitude of the problem.
Right.
And its potential growth.
I just find it really arbitrary the way it is right now. And that kind of,
Right.
that bothers me. And Allison, I could imagine somebody who's selling real estate at Sotheby's and they start out in rentals and they're hardly making any money. And then they're starting to make a lot of money. And so but they want to keep paying hardly anything on a nice subsidized house so they could save money. It's that kind of person, not somebody who's a mega millionaire or something. But anyway, it's just I just think it's awkward. The one piece of real estate thing inside the allowed space just feels arbitrary and awkward to me.
There's none in the OEZ, 0 in the OEZ. It would be 1 outside.
What does OEZ stand for? Something
Ownership
zone?
exclusion zone, so it's basically Rifle to Edwards, and then Roaring Fork and Crystal drainages.
Well, I don't want to stop
Well, I mean,
progress.
we're
but-
over time here on the agenda, so
Staff's gonna noodle on it some more, figure
Yeah.
out if there's something to bring back and take into point the idea of multiple assets and looking at other things besides just property as asset.
I mean, if it's working, we don't need to change it. That's what.
well, I mean, I think that sort of the case that the challenge that we run into is that you do have people, like I said, who want to move here today. They can't afford to buy another home at all, and that they see people that own places in Hawaii and
Yeah.
Arizona, and they're living in that employee
Yeah.
housing, and that's a little bit of it's just that's the system we have today.
Just know if I win the $300 million, I will sell my deed restricted home.
Thank you, Cindy.
Unfortunately, may continue still working, but I will sell my deed restricted home.
All right, so let's
I just heard the second part. That's all I care about.
Well, that's the point. If they're living in those houses, they're working in our community, period.
All right, let's move on to the 2022 budgets for the APCHA Administration Fund, Smuggler Mountain Apartments.
And these are just 2 of them, and it's just to go over really quickly, it's not approving it. With regards to the 620 budget, which is the the administrative budget, it's something that we kind of have to wait for the board, for the BOCC and the city council to approve it. We will bring that back, because the board still has to approve all the budgets for all the properties. Smuggler, you have to, because you actually own Smuggler. So with regards to the housing administration, if you go to page 94, page 4 of the memo, it kind of gives you what the opening balance is, the revenue budget, the expenditure budget, and the ending balance. We did talk with regards to the 620 budget, we did meet with the Board of County Commissioners yesterday and went over that. And I think that they were pretty receptive of it, which makes me really happy. City Council, we're going over this on October 25th.
Monday.
So we'll know a little bit more at that point in time. With regards to the Smuggler budget, it pretty much maintains there's not a lot of changes on it. The main thing is that when we're getting some of these, there's 11 units there, and it's been there for a really long time. We've had a lot of the same tenants there for a really long time. Some are starting to move out that have been there for a long time, so when they do, we finally get into those units to do a real nice, massive redo. And it is costing a little bit more. So like what I brought back the last time was an appropriation for additional capital for one of the units there. And that could be down the line as well, that we'll come back for that. That's not planned in the budget, but I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. Until we finally decide on whether we're gonna try to redevelop that property, it is 11 units of Category 1, Category 1 rental units. We don't have a lot of those out there. So this one is one. So it is one of the lower income properties that we have.
And it is owned by APCHA.
Yes. The county had it at one point in time, believe it or not. It was a Superfund site, and because of the mine tailings, and they didn't want to deal with it, so they deeded it over to the Housing Authority. So that's how we got that property.
Okay.
And Cindy, do we have longer-term records on any of these rentals to know how much additional money beyond rents we've had to put in to keep them up and maintain them?
For Smuggler, not there, we haven't done a lot because we have very little turnover there.
Right.
It's just this last year, we've had 2 that have been long-term tenants that have finally turned over.
But I guess what I'm getting at is the 30% rental range of their incomes has not been sufficient to fund the capital reserve budget of the project.
No,
to be able to-
actually, we have cash in that budget. It's just, we need your approval to appropriate
Okay.
those to pay the bills.
Thank you.
But we have money.
It is
If-
in the
yes.
reserves. Okay, that
Yes,
helps me out.
and Smuggler, right now, the ending balance is 420,000.
Okay.
So it's not,
Perfect.
it's not that we don't have money, it's just we have to appropriate that.
Yeah, sure.
When we're
No, that's
spending the
good.
additional.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Great.
No, doesn't look like it. All right, so we will move along for continued discussion on seller standards and capital repairs.
Really, you have to say yay after that. Yay.
Yay!
Here we are again.
Here we are again, and we are definitely making progress. So tonight, and Maddie's gonna help me with my slides again, thank you. What I've proposed in the memo, and you can see on the next slide, is that I'd like you to dive a little bit deep on policy discussion topic 1, which is exercising right of first refusal on segments B and C or some subset, and we'll go into what that means. And then secondly, talk a little bit about the policy implementation. I particularly keyed on Carson at the last meeting said, I'm not sure we're ever gonna get a pool of contractors, maybe we should just hire people. So just to have a little bit of discussion around that. And then 2C is simply, if we have time, going back to that discussion of, we're never gonna put somebody upside down on their initial purchase price. If they refinanced above that, it's a different story. But that proposal and trying to see where the board is kind of feeling on that now that you've had some time to process. So with that, let's go to the next slide, Maddie. So why this might be a good idea, and then possibility of creating a pilot program. And the reason I say pilot program is it is frequently a good idea to kind of try something out, and either that the amount of dollars is limited or the time is limited. And tests are, I've done pilot projects on various topics, and most of them have worked, and you move forward with them, and some of them have been fabulous disasters that you go, great, I'm glad that was a pilot. Next slide. So on this one, actually, so this is a version of the chart you saw last week, and instead of, I've added the word segment, because poor Skippy made the mistake of using the word category. We're gonna call these segments, and the major change to this are 2 things. One is that top row, there are always going to be homes that are kind of outside of whatever we do. And those are the ones that don't have the language saying they need to conform with the APCHA regulations as updated from time to time. We actually can't count those right now, but just put those to the side. I'm going to focus on the green, yellow, and then the piece in the blue. And Maddie, if you'll go to the next slide. We'll start with segment B. So part of what I tried to do was quantify what are we actually talking about. And if you look at the mobile home, and right, you don't have to have lived in one to know that those units are not built to last 50 years. And someone could do a great job keeping up their home, and it is still not going to last 50 years. Many people have replaced them with single-family homes. Some have, actually, Cindy and Bethany, why don't you tell the story? You recently met with someone who replaced it with a Clayton home?
Yes.
I think you were telling me?
Yeah, someone in Woody Creek recently replaced with a Clayton home, and they are so incredibly thrilled. The process was, I think, a year or so, but it was well worth the effort, and they just absolutely love being in the new home, and so it was.
Is that a, yeah, I was just
Clayton
gonna
home, they're modulars?
They're modulars out of Grand Junction, and they come in, and we actually, Tom helped us draft documents because Clayton Homes is actually the owner of that lot for the period of construction. And so they bought it from the buyer. Clayton Homes owned it for a period of time, and then they sold it back to the qualified buyer. And so,
Is that just an insurance thing, or?
I believe so. It's part of their policy. So Tom worked through a document that we had them sign so that, because they're not obviously a qualified buyer. So it worked really, really well. They were easy to work with from our end, and certainly the new owners are satisfied, and it's a relatively local company out of Grand Junction.
And a couple other things, Clayton Homes is owned by Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett. They've also done a lot on energy efficiency. And while, we're not saying it has to be sole source, and if we were to have a program, we would recommend doing an RFP, but it's a nice product, and it's well built, and energy efficiency has been one of their more recent areas of focus.
So they hauled off the trailer?
Yeah,
It was all part of the.
Yeah. They take care of it. They clear the site and then rebuild.
I realize it might not be information that can be shared widely, but it'd be wonderful to have an idea if we can get some of the cost that was a part of that, so that we can then apply it to what type of costs we're talking about overall. And in this segment, you're not talking about like, these all get done right away.
Nope.
This is as they sell.
As they sell.
And as it's needed.
Yep.
Okay.
So a couple more things. I will show you some pictures. The one that I have pictures of, they start at $150,000, and just like any home you buy now, right? These start at $150,000, and you can add on whatever you want, right?
Yeah.
That's the kind of deal. They do have them that are $80,000. The typical.
This is the Clayton?
These are Clayton. Yeah. So right, and if you pick a really simple roof line. You can buy a modular home for, or a mobile home for $80,000, right? That is absolutely doable. Maddie, if you just go, thank you for going forward, and back one slide. So what we're talking about here is 75 total units on this, and as Rachel pointed out, it would be as they sell. The second piece is, and let me preface segment C. When we talked at the October 6th meeting, when the board talked about price 40% or more below the median category, John brought up the idea of adding profit. I want to take that off the table for this discussion. I think it's a discussion the board can have later. But I just want you to focus on that we're talking about 80 units that would fit in this particular category. And then the third segment, right, so we were able to quantify a couple of the segments, and then that last segment, we're not going to know how many homes we have in bad condition, but I appreciate what Rachel and Allison said today about reminding us all, and David has said it in the past as well. The majority of people keep up with their homes. These are homes that they live in, and in fact, one of the examples we were talking about where someone went underwater on a loan and their house was in, and the unit was in, tear down condition, that was the same home. Which is one of the ones we've recently been talking about. So until we start seeing we get a lot of home inspections, we're just not gonna know. So, and having thought about this more, I would suggest taking that piece that I put in red in the second column, I would take that off the table about having making it an option for seller to fix their home before they sell it, or having the home repaired before they sell it. I don't think we should say to it, the reality is, if we say to sellers, hey, you can sell your home to APCHA now, or you can wait 2 months or 3 months while it all gets fixed, APCHA's just going to take on a lot.
You mean they're gonna choose APCHA?
They're gonna
And
choose
so-
APCHA.
So why put it as a
Yeah,
second?
so that's just a recommendation for now. I do want to jump to and really focus the discussion on segments B and C. So thank you, Maddie. Next slide. So this is a rough number, but these are based on what happens right now. And if I don't know, I did not go in and do math on, do mobile homes turn over more frequently? I mean, I think in general, they don't turn over very frequently. If they turn over at the same rate, our 6 units a year would be kind of what APCHA would be exercising a right of first refusal on. And if you just focused on mobile homes instead of the ones that were 60% below, it would be a much lower number.
And so, we would buy them
Yep.
and do what?
So let's take, thank you for asking that. Let's take the a mobile home as an example. What we would do is first and foremost have it inspected. APCHA would exercise its right of first refusal, and in that process, be making an evaluation around, and we'd likely initially contract with someone to help us with this, make an evaluation of, is this a replace or is this a repair? Because there may be homes that, I know someone who lives in one who had it replaced 20 years ago. So that one might be okay. It might be in great shape. So make that evaluation, and then either make APCHA would either have the repairs done or do the replacement. And this would have to be part of the math is if let's say APCHA exercised the right of first refusal, there are mobile homes out there right now where the price is like $400,000. Right? Aren't there some?
They're probably, most of them are a little bit under that.
So,
but
so
yeah.
let's say 3.
Mm-hmm.
So it's $300,000. APCHA exercises the right of first refusal. Let's say we spend $150,000 to put a new home on, footings, foundation, whatever on top of that. The board at that point, I think that would be a policy discussion. Do you want all of those costs for that new home for that new mobile home to be added to the cost of the unit, or would you want to peel off some of that cost and subsidize it? Because essentially it's a new home.
So in terms of financing something like that, so let's say we decide to do one of these Clayton things, so, because the trailer that was there was just horrendous. Does Clayton haul off the trailer?
Yes.
That's
Yes?
part of it.
Awesome. Okay, so you
It's probably not
contract with
part, it's
Clayton.
probably an additional cost though.
Yeah, right. So you contract with Clayton, and what kind of time period are we gonna be holding the money? How long are we gonna be financing this for? What do you picture as the turnaround time? You might know from the one that already happened, right?
It could be up to a year.
Up to a year.
And I think it would depend on what product we're buying.
Yeah, right.
Like
Of
how
course.
fancy the roof line is or what the upgrades are. And I think some of it is if we went forward with this, we would start reaching out to Clayton Homes or some other folks and start getting some better estimates of that.
And so then, rather than buying a mobile home, and so this is on a foundation with footers, the whole thing.
And right, we could also go the stick frame route and scrape it and build a new home. It's just that given the other products in these areas, this is it matches, and it's also likely a good way to go, and you're investing in a product that's likely to last longer as well.
And it's local.
And I think the other time constraint that we would have is working with the county to get permits in place.
Oh, you think there might be a time constraint there?
So I mean that would have to be considered into this as well. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and stick
Not
build
just
is
the
much more
county.
disruptive to the neighbors
Yeah.
as well.
What'd you say?
Stick build is more disruptive to the neighbors in the smaller lots, you know.
Yeah.
So Love to hand it to the board at this point and have you, what do you think about segment B versus C? B being the 2 mobile home segments, and then the other one's the below market.
I think this program is advancing. I think we're getting somewhere. I think the more you get, then you have to work on the details more, unfortunately. So the one thing that has really struck me is how do you keep the equity down the line? One mobile home, they say, hey, it's really not that bad. It still has some useful life. Go ahead and sell it, and we're just going to take X for seller standards from your appreciation price. And this guy who's really bad, it's going to be, no, we're going to exercise our right of first refusal. Are we also going to negotiate down what their maximum price is since we're having to do it? And so it's just a matter of how do we keep the equities in between the different properties. And that's what the public looks at later of like, well, they got this deal, why didn't I? And I understand that people aren't all going to get the same deal. It just has to be documented in such a way that you can say why there's distinguishing features to it. And so that's the one thing I've really looked at equity-wise. And, again, it was last week's conversation, but people who've been in the home for 30 or 40 years, they've kept that resale value down based on these appreciation rates. Whereas people who flipped their units and the unit turned over 5 or 6 times in the same 20 years, you have just the same amount of wear and tear and defunct things, but now they're getting to start their price at $250 and this guy's at $175. So, let's not, it's the people who've worked here 30 and 40 years and stuck it out who've actually done a favor of keeping their prices low and sticking it out in a tough town. But
remember though, in segment C, the intent is not to raise the price.
I understand
it's the assumption, some of these we may
closer.
Well, the assumption is that there may be a lot, this unit has been owned for a long time, there may be a lot that needs to be updated.
More.
It is possible that we go into that unit and say,
they've done everything.
Wow, they've done everything, it stays at the same price, and then the board has that's the discussion if the board wants to.
Again, the only thing, it's like, I think that we need to think about equity and in the application over time. And one other small example for the board, many years ago, Lone Pine condominiums, which is part free market and part affordable housing, right up below Hunter Creek, those affordables were all on a land lease. And suddenly they couldn't get any good mortgage rates when they went to resell. The private market wouldn't take care of them. And so the public tax dollars put $400,000 into buying that land lease. That was never added to the price of those units. Those people were never asked to take it out of their appreciation or their equity when they sold.
They all got some credit for that. Because they all went under brand new deed restrictions that included some of that price.
They did, so they got credit for the public money
they
put into their units, because it was a public buyout of that land lease. Yeah, so I just want to keep kind of a level playing field about equity and how we've treated people in the past and how we're going to treat them in the future.
Okay, Allison's had her hand up for a while.
Thank you. I had a similar question. Would APCHA be buying these at the maximum allowable price when they exercise their right of first refusal?
No, the intent would be, and this is where it's a pilot, is that we finish, if the board wanted to go down this path of taking a segment instead of taking the whole thing as a trial, we would need to continue that discussion about, do you want to reduce the appreciation? And then, so what would happen is step 1 would be the inspection. Step 2 would be an assessment, an evaluation of these problems with the unit. How long has this person lived in here? And trying to assess, to ascertain how much are really they responsible for versus how much of it is a legacy issue that was, this person moved in 2 years ago and the foundation is horrible, and obviously is 40 and the unit's 50 years old. So it would be reasonable to say, and believe me, when I've thought through this is a really hard part of this program no matter what, but we don't have a program unless we can say, somebody's gonna make an evaluation as far as where does the line go for what that person is responsible for. So to Allison, then step 3 is putting a dollar figure to how much do we need to reduce that person's appreciation, and is there a line below which the board does not wanna go?
Below or above?
Okay.
Below which? So do you want someone to have 0.5% appreciation?
Yeah, I get that.
Do you wanna keep that? Or maybe it's 0?
Right, and then I think further discussion on if we get that price down, why APCHA buys it and we don't just put it on the market for that price. I don't need to have that discussion now.
Well,
As far as,
Allison, that's actually a good point, though, is that the intent of this program is that we never let a unit that's in bad shape go back on the market. That Carson's wet wall never happens again.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess the question is, I mean, does APCHA need to be involved in that process? I mean, if we give somebody I mean, it sounds like we had one that worked pretty well. I mean, do we need to take on the extra capacity? I mean, if we're giving people the appreciation to allow them to do it.
So the requirement then would be, sorry,
you're
to
good.
clarify, the requirement would be, okay, you've won this lottery, unit 222 is yours, but you have to put in a Clayton Homes or a similar-esque product.
Yeah, I mean, and right, you could work with them and have a quote and say, you know, the maximum price we'll allow you is.
You know,
I see some version of what we've been discussing wherein we do take on, APCHA does take on the burden of getting something inspected, and assessing, is this life and safety kind of stuff, and how much would it cost to bring it up. But then kind of passing that information on to the public, so no one's ever feels like they won and they can't say no, because when do you ever win? And they are up against all this newfound expenses. They saw that coming in, and if what happens is that 0 people bid at maximum price, that's back to the old days. That's how we have 1 person in 2-bedroom apartments, because when this started, there'd be apartments where no one wanted it at maximum price, or they didn't qualify all the way, and we'd go down the tiers. I think I'm trying to get the gears going on how little can APCHA pay, or how little can we be involved and still get people into good housing that becomes homes. The second part,
Allison, before you leave that one, and please don't lose the second one.
Okay.
Before you leave that one, I completely agree. We do not generally want to be involved, and the greater program we want to have is addresses getting the units updated and doesn't have APCHA doing the work. Now, that being said, segment B, I think APCHA staff would probably agree that if it's a really bad mobile home, we should not let it go onto the market and tell someone they need to fix it, right? It's time and effort and frankly, painful for staff.
So this would basically be ones that are condemned or,
Right.
or close.
Right. And the idea in there is that if it's in good shape or reasonably good shape, we're turning those fast. So these are the exceptions, not the rules.
Okay.
And segment B, I think we collectively feel pretty strongly. Segment C is hey, that's an option, and there are multiple ways those could be structured. So thank you for letting me respond to that. Please go on number 2.
Yes, and in response to that, I will say that when we've seen that in these segment B ones, again, that's been houses where no one was living in those houses. They were not, they were already out of compliance, right? Someone hadn't been living there, and then it went into kind of the condemned state. So there's other safeguards there from other angles. My question for the other ones was, okay, so segment D gets the option to repair some of the stuff that comes up in the inspection on their own, but segment B and segment C owners are not allowed to do the repairs on their end.
So my recommendation actually on segment D, initially, I wanted to make sure I showed you what I brought last time. But now I'm pulling that piece in red. I'm suggesting you pull that off the table and don't give people an option. It will likely, no, I think I can say safely, it is always going to be best for the owner if they can sell it to APCHA. That is a really quick sale. They're gonna get money back quickly, and there's nothing they have to do in addition to selling the property, right? It's fast and easy. We will likely be asking other owners to do things to their homes if needed. If David ever sells his, they won't need it. But if it needs work, we are going to ask before that goes to sale that work be done on it.
So I just see, I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. So segment B and C, APCHA brings the property to current standards. Segment B and C, they don't get to bring it up to current standards.
They're forbidden from it?
No. I mean, they can do work on it while they're living in it, etc. It's basically saying that these two types of properties, they're unicorns, right? There aren't that many of them, first and foremost. But they're unicorns, and they are much more likely to need significant work than the average other property.
So we have a section where we're like, we don't want you doing the work, and we have a section where we're like, we don't want to do the work, you do the work. Those are our two splits.
I think that's fair. Or let me rephrase that. This is a proposal for the board, right? It's I think we probably, and Cindy and Bethany, please, like, feel free to jump in, because I just feel like on the mobile home piece that we feel like there's a good path forward. These are typically really old developments. How old are Woody Creek and Smuggler Run?
Some of the units are very old,
Yeah.
and some are relatively new.
Well, Smuggler was there when I first came here in college.
Yeah, well, they're
That
talking
was
Smuggler Run, the addition.
50-some years ago.
Yeah,
So, and here's the thing, if it's been replaced,
not an issue.
then we could either say we're not exercising right of first refusal, we're gonna go right to lottery, or we could exercise the right of first refusal and APCHA puts it to lottery, right? Those are possibilities.
Yeah.
It's just that these are unique in the housing stock. Thank you.
Tom has his hand up.
Yeah, I trying to understand the concerns here. Maybe I'm not picking up on it properly, but the segment C homes are homes that 40% below median value that would be out there today. I think we're making the assumption that these are homes that are in bad shape, that the seller isn't going to want to spend the money to make improvements just to try to get maximum resale price. Isn't that correct?
Tom, it's a little different. The assumption is that it could be incredibly outdated.
The B and Cs.
The
Isn't
C.
that saying the same thing, basically?
I don't think so, because disrepair is different from out of date.
I see. Okay.
Obsolescence.
Right, so
But in any event, under segment C, the seller they don't get maximum resale price if the unit is in bad shape, right? They get a negotiated price with APCHA that's below what the maximum would be because they're not meeting minimum standards, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
But they would get the maximum on their appreciation for their property.
If the home is in good
If
shape.
the home is in good
Yeah.
shape, right. So I think, Allison,
Yeah. I'm talking about the homes that are in bad shape, and those are the ones where I can't imagine APCHA wanting to buy those unless after spending the money to buy them and fix them up, and then repricing them at current value, APCHA can't break even.
That was my question.
And the whole idea is that APCHA can be made whole, and a buyer gets a good quality property, and the ability for that to happen is the difference between deed restricted price on the old unit and the current value of those same kind of units.
right. just,
I think we would have to take that into consideration when a unit comes up.
Yeah.
We would have to look at that.
We are
quick-
back to the original arguments here, and I'm
Yeah.
sorry, but this
Yeah.
is really upsetting. We're now back to saying that we've allowed people enough appreciation to have actually done the repairs. When we look on the sheet and we see multiple years where we gave them 0 appreciation, or 1.1, or 1.4, and we're not even beginning to look at what did those repairs actually cost.
right.
What if the repairs cost 4% a year and we're giving people 1% a year? Now we're gonna take everything back out of them and it wasn't even their own fault. I mean, I'm sorry, but we've just circled right back around to it's all the seller's fault, no matter what. And if our
I think
appreciation had been appropriate, maybe they could have gotten more. But, and I'm sorry to interrupt on this conversation, but it's getting very, very circular. And, you know, maybe what we really need is some narratives about written, how it plays out, that we all see the same steps. Because I think in our minds, we're all seeing slightly separate steps as we talk about this conversation. And then we bring in new tangents. But if we had some narrative descriptions that said, this is how it will play out, and this is what will happen, and offer us all a little more certainty about each one of these processes, because I'm hearing it different than Allison's hearing it, than maybe others are hearing it.
Right, well, and I think this is,
I have to say though, Rachel, you know, what you're getting to is a fundamental question about whether sellers are responsible for meeting minimum standards or not.
No, I'm saying whether our expectations are becoming unrealistic based on the actual cost of repairs, the actual deterioration of the units over time, as happens to all physical structures, and the amount of appreciation we're
Well, but
telling
that's-
people they should have, that should replace this unit in total. And we're back to saying that
Well,
that is a
that boils-
possible, and it's fiscally not possible.
I just have a,
In reality, that amounts to whether or not you enforce the minimum standards against the seller. You're saying that because they're not getting enough appreciation on the unit, maybe we shouldn't do that. I don't know how you.
That's
I don't know
not
how
what
you
I'm
solve
saying,
that
Tom,
problem.
I'm
You can't
sorry,
do
it's just
anything.
you know, never mind, I'm beyond it, it's just. I still come back to why, or do we put public money into rental projects when we are fully charging the good third, and we have professional management over all those, and what we charge for rent's not enough to keep it up. But we're not asking those renters to all put in a new 20% premium of some sort, and I'm not trying to argue that sellers shouldn't be paying a significant amount. But we have no floor on this right now. We're telling people that they could pay out more than they bought their unit for to begin with.
That's not the proposal on the
Well,
table.
I don't- hold
no,
on.
if you only say that you could get a 0.5%
right.
appreciation
Yeah, I-
is the minimum, you could ask someone for $100,000 of appreciation to pay for a unit that they bought for 30 years ago.
No, but
I-
the rental example doesn't work because the tenants are paying below market rents. So it's understood that
They're paying
that
rents matched
the
to their incomes.
landlord is going to have to put money into those units.
I just have a quick clarifying question on Allison's question. So for segment C, I mean, so there's two different, you could have somebody in segment C house that has taken care of their house, but it is obsolete. I mean, it is 30, 40 years old. They've taken care of their house, and they, as long as, right, the house has been taken care of, they will still receive maximum sales price on their property.
Yes,
Then, after they receive maximum sales price on their property, APCHA would go in and update the property and bring it up to today's standards. We would not charge or deduct that cost from the seller. Right?
and yes, and the intent is to go in and see, are there things that we would look at and say, these should be updated for this unit to move into the future successfully, right? So we're not looking at ripping out everything and making it fabulous, but it may be the same as we do when somebody moves out of a 30-year rental unit. Okay,
Right.
these appliances really do need to be updated. The energy efficiency needs to be addressed, right? There's nothing wrong with the unit, and we want to put in new plumbing fixtures because they're lower flow, right?
But none of those costs are being paid by the seller.
None of them are being paid by the
Or
seller.
their appreciation or
That would
anything
be
else, right.
added to the sales price. Yep.
Got it. Just want to make sure. Okay, go ahead, Francie.
I have a question about the value of the unit compared to the value of the land on which it sits. So if you say that there's a mobile home that's worth 400,000 or maybe 1,000 of them in the valley, I don't know, that's astounding to me. And because a mobile home is not worth $400,000. I mean, maybe some of them are, but so to me, a lot of the value is the property on which it sits. So even if they've let their house deteriorate, the value of that property is still going up. And I'm kind of curious with a mobile home where the balance is between the depreciation and the appreciation. And it seems to me that the depreciation of something like a mobile home, is particularly some of the older ones, like if you buy one that's already 20 years old, it's going to depreciate way faster than any appreciation we can guarantee them. That's not our fault.
Not in this town, not if it's
That's
deed
because of the
restricted.
property that it
If
sits
it's,
on.
if it's
So-
deed restricted, the assessor's office values it as to what the maximum sales price is. They do show a difference between the land, unless it's been merged, unless the lot has been merged with the mobile home, then it's one price. But if it's not, then the mobile home is priced differently than the improvement. And you see a difference of the improvement versus the home.
Yeah, so that's what I was wondering about. So in terms of this Clayton House idea, for saving some of these lots basically from the mobile home that's on it, it seems to me that APCHA probably would recoup its investment in this, just because of the value of having a house in Pitkin County. You know, it's not gonna, I don't see it selling for less than what we put in it.
So Francie, I think the question that I would want to bring to the board, let's say it costs $300,000, and then we put a $150,000 mobile home on it that had $100,000 in site and removal costs. That would be a question, particularly if it would push it into the next category. If we were able to get funds, either grant or if the city wanted to contribute funds to to APCHA to address some of these things, would you want to buy down or subsidize some of that?
So for example, this one, I just pulled up a random one in our system, is worth $305,000. So if we were to give them an entire $305,000, $100,000 in fees would bring it up to $400,000, and then a $150,000 home, we're at $550,000 that we're looking to sell it back to a new buyer at. So that's, if we were to provide everything and not reduce down at all, that's what you're looking at.
Are there buyers for a $550,000 mobile home?
Single family home?
Yeah,
Yes, 100%.
sure.
But we will eventually
But it would
see-
not be a mobile home anymore, it'd be a,
It would be a single family, yeah.
and they will no longer work as a retail clerk, they're gonna work somewhere up here. But, I mean, part of the question would become, what would be comparable of the subsidy that the county is gonna be putting into Phillips Curve? And what, you know, we know what some of those mobile homes are in their condition, and that's not on that board yet because it's not in APCHA yet, it's
Yeah.
not formal. But, what income class do we want Phillips Curve to be in the future? Should they be $550,000 mobile homes? Or what level of subsidy versus the, was it 9 million purchase price or something? Divided by those units, is the county gonna leave with those units? Or are those purchasers gonna pay 100% truck or not?
yeah.
Probably not. And
Well,
we're
I
not
know that,
asking a
well,
lot-
and part of the goal of that is to keep those people there.
That's right.
Until the people who are there aren't gonna have a $500,000 or even $350,000
No, but you will be
to upgrade.
creating some sort of appreciation base price for those people, and it's either with the mobile home they have on it now or a new mobile home.
Go ahead, Diane.
Thank you, and I'm just
Time
noticing
check.
the time. So, thank you for this discussion. What I would, you don't need to tell me now, we can have a shorter discussion at the next board meeting on what direction you wanna go. I think the question that I would put on the table is, I brought these to you as I think the segment discussion last week was good, that, hey, we've got some things that are a little bit, they're Sesame Street. One of these things is not like the other in our APCHA portfolio. There is the opportunity, if you would like, to either treat them differently And we can treat them differently within a whole program and move forward on getting a whole program done. Or if you would like, we can take one, both, either of these segments and go down a path of fully developing the program. And Rachel, the narrative sort of is already there, right? I've laid out in the packet all of the steps that would be taken. We could take a narrow view and say, hey, let's just look at segment B. Let's build out the program. Now, the program would still be built out it would match a single family home, right? Because we have to decide how much appreciation, what's the max you want to take from a seller, where's the other money going to come from, how does the financial model work? We have to answer all those questions, but we could do it in a narrow segment, or we can go back to approaching the whole broad road. So that would be, I think, a question for discussion at the next board meeting and something for you to think about. Does one of those make more sense than the other? I think the narrow path is a little bit quicker. And it may be easier to wrap our heads around, knowing all the time that we will absolutely next year be coming back to the greater HOA question, and needing to know how this all applies in that bigger picture. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so 6:22, then I guess we'll just table this until the next meeting, or do we want to?
Can I make a quick comment? Can I make a quick comment?
Go ahead.
Carson?
Go ahead.
This is a big deal. This is a big policy decision, but, one option is it's not like you're changing the regulations here. One option is to, try the next unit in each of these categories. Try this and see what happens before you decide on a major programmatic change. Try it. See what happens the next time a unit in Woody Creek or Smuggler comes available and you have to address the condition of the unit and whether or not you're going to buy it or not. Play it out. See what happens.
I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll end up with it
It's
one
just
way or
a
the
thought,
other.
but,
That's all you were asking for in the first
it's
place, right? A
always-
pilot program?
It's always difficult to make a programmatic decision when you don't have experience with, the problem or the solution we're dealing with here. So try it. You got nothing to lose, and don't have to speculate.
Allison, what are your
about
thoughts
the
on that?
future Programmatically.
First of all, I'm never patching in again if I have to see myself in this infinite mirror screen. Mortifying.
It's terrible.
So it's one thing that the board, I think, would have to approve if we wanted to try that was that upfront cost of an inspection, right, and of staff time to make these analyses. So we are, it's a pilot, we're not changing everything, but we are kind of saying, go ahead, and there's some time and money involved with our decision. I'm saying, like, hey, yeah, let's try it. And so I'd want to make sure that there's support for putting in that investment.
There may be an issue with it would be a negotiation around the appreciation, because currently we don't have the teeth to take down someone's appreciation.
Right.
Remember, that doesn't exist in the regulation, so that would be a negotiation. And actually, Bethany may have a pilot for us. She talked to us about it the other day. But that's a one-off versus what I would consider a real pilot program. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, director's comments. Allison?
None, thank you.
Rachel?
Yeah, thank you. I realize these are difficult conversations, and how it hits the public is going to be an even bigger example. But I appreciate the hard work that's gone into it, and I do think the only thing is there should be some sort of floor that you cannot ask for repair money more than someone paid for the original unit. It just seems impossible, but I know that that's where we're heading when we say you may have only received 0.5% to make the repairs. But it sounds like, someone buying a car and then they're saying, well, yeah, but now you have to pay the price of the car plus 50% in order to even sell it, and it just starts sounding crazy to me that a lot of our residents are gonna hear that news, you know, at some point. Because we're not even dealing with yet the missing HOA reserves and what money we take from the seller for that. Because you could move into a Hunter Creek and I'll tell you, they're gonna hit you with a large HOA special assessment. The other thing I really wanna say is that none of our projects are homogeneous, even if we broke them into the 5 categories. At a place like Hunter Creek, 2/3 of the units are free market. And they get to vote for the increase for the common area expenses. And the free market units get a nice appreciation boost on the free market when they charge all of us to make improvements that they get appreciation on and we don't. I mean, and that's an awkward situation there, I tell you what. But so a lot of our units are mixed in with HOAs that are free market and have different HOA demands than a normal all 100% affordable would have. And they're just not all apples and apples when we talk about people in these situations. That's my main thing I would say today. And then the second is, I understand we've been talking about it narratively. I'm just talking about kind of a written step-by-step, so you can look at it and then you can see where a fatal flaw is. Then you can see where there's a missing step. Then you can see where the numbers aren't adding up. Because I do believe we have structural deficit issues within our program from how it was formed. And, you know, the issue has become, how do we pay for all these repairs that are needed? But I look at this as an opportunity to really evaluate a program that has grown for 50 years. I mean, we're at a point of reevaluating what got us here, what went wrong, what went right, and how do we fix it going forward. And we're not quite tinkering around the edges, but we are absolutely working within the old framework to say, how can we change things in the old framework to work in the future? And it was a framework with a structural deficit in it from the beginning. And so that's where I'd love to see us try to rethink that entirely, so that it's fair to the sellers, it's fair to the buyers, it's fair to the public across the board. But that's all I'm looking for. Thank you.
That's all.
That's all?
That's all. That's it, today. Tomorrow it's the entrance to Aspen.
Just the easy problems.
Yeah, that's me.
Ready for me? I just wanted to thank the 3 of you and everybody else who was involved in putting this proposal together. I think it has, maybe you too, Matthew, it has a really nice cleanliness and precision to it that I think could be really beneficial if we can figure out the economics of it. It's just clean, and I wish more things at APCHA were this clean, you know. And just really quickly, in terms of your talking about the initial structure that we've all inherited, Rachel, that's kind of like what I was referring to about coming up with something that's not so arbitrary, you know, because since I came on the board, it's been like, yeah, but that's sort of not the way we do things. I've heard that, not in those words, nobody has said that, but it's been kind of an obstacle, actually, I think, to some of the things that the current board wants to do. The current board is pretty forward-thinking and very caring, and I think there's some changes that the current board wants to make that they're intrepid to make because of the history of the current structure, quote unquote. So anyway, thank you guys for that proposal. I thought it was cool.
I'd kind of like to echo some of what Francie just said. The period of time that I've been on this board, I've been certainly impressed with everybody on this board and the ideas that come forward, but I think right now we've come so far from where this board was when I came on. It's incredible, and it's so positive. We are actually making intelligent decisions, thinking about the future, the long term. It's really exciting, I think, right now where APCHA is at. And I really hope that the people in this whole community understand that it's been a sea change for this organization about how things are going. And I definitely want to thank Diane for putting this forward, this proposal. It's very exciting, and it's going to lead to something really wonderful, I think.
Yeah, agreed. And so, I mean, Matthew, I hope you're not regretting your decision.
Thanks, guys.
No, but welcome. I mean, as you can see, this is great work, and this is, well done. I mean, and Diane, again, echo what Dave said. Thank you. I mean, this is all great. I can tell there's a lot of work that goes into this, and it's very much appreciated. So, thank you.
Please just give me the opportunity to say that this program is based on Cindy and Bethany, right? We all sit and we talk about it, and we go through it. Sometimes we include Tom, and we go through it. And actually, a lot of the mobile home piece is based on work that Cindy's done years ago, on negotiating deals and bringing this one to form. So it is truly on the shoulders of giants. So thank you.
Agreed. Yeah, and I mean, I think that these are very large, complex issues, and I think we've got the right staff, we've got the right board, and certainly the last thing I would say is, to the public, if you've got ideas or thoughts and of things that we could be doing better, please come to the meetings and share those with us. We've started to see some of that, and I think the more inputs, the better. So with that, I will.
Does Matt get a comment?
Go ahead.
I already commented. I'm not scared.
No, I think Matthew's saying they're going, Afghanistan evacuation, APCHA.
I mean, which is more complex?
Oh dear, oh dear. Mr. Chair, would you accept the motion to adjourn?
I would.
I will make that motion.
I second that motion.
Cindy.
Allison,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Carson,
Yes.
Rachel,
Yes.
Francie.
Yes.
Meeting is adjourned.
I have a quick question to ask everybody while the board is here.
Okay.
Our next meeting is not until
Recording
November 10th.
stopped.
Until November 10th?
Until November 10th, because the Board of County Commissioners, you start meeting the same time we do. So this meeting now is not until, it's a special meeting on November 10th.
Okay.
We could have one on the 30th, what's better for everybody, if you want another meeting in November. Rachel would not like to do that because that's the first time we